A woman revolutionized how sexual assault cases are tried, but her creation was trademarked in a man's name. Who was she? And why did this happen? I spoke to New York Times columnist and author of The Secret History of the Rape Kit, Pagan Kennedy, to learn the real story.
Before the rape kit existed, what was the process of going about investigating sexual assault or taking care of the victim?
In the early 70s, actually, there were a few little experiments with rape kits here and there, but they weren't well designed. There was one kind of shockingly bad kit in one city in California where literally in the instructions it says if the victim is a sleazy prostitute, then you don't need to test, you don't need to collect evidence. But generally what would happen is that the police would take the victim to an ER. They might come into the ER and yell, "We've got a rape here," out to the person at the desk. Like, there was no sense of privacy. The nurses and doctors would immediately try to care for the victim, whatever her wounds or, whatever she needed. And then they'd kind of throw everything into a bag for the crime lab, but nobody had trained them. And there was really no communication between the crime labs, the police, the nurses. There was really no system in place. So this bag gets to the crime lab and the crime lab's like, "What is this?" And they just throw it out.
And so where was Marty Goddard in all of this? What was it that spurred her to get involved?
Yeah, so she was a divorcee in the early 70s in Chicago, working for a nonprofit. And one of her sort of duties was to be on the board of this, what they would then call a helpline for runaway teenagers. So she would volunteer. And this is the early 70s. So there's this conception that all the teenagers who are running away are running off to San Francisco to take drugs and have a great time or something. But when she answered these calls, what she found was actually these kids were running away from perpetrators and their families. And she suddenly saw, this was an epidemic of abuse that was hidden in plain sight. She became very upset because obviously there were all these perpetrators out there and nobody was looking, nobody was even aware. And then in 1974, there really was this kind of awakening, this new anti-rape movement. And out of that came a new effort in Chicago. Well, you know how politicians, when there's a problem, they like to create a task force. So they created a rape task force. But that gave Marty Goddard the ability to talk to everybody, talk to the hospital administrators and the nurses and the crime lab people, and begin to diagnose what was going wrong. And so that was how she began to realize, we need to create kind of a system where people are trained and conceived of this system working around this kit that everybody would have. So it would sort of standardize everything. She was told by a friend in the police department, "Look, you've got to get this guy, Louis Vitullo, on your side because he's very powerful in the crime lab." And he was kind of Chicago famous in that time for having helped work on some really big cases. So she did go in, and then according to my sources, he initially threw her out sort of for her impertinence to suggest that the system needed to be built. But then days later, he created a prototype and began working with her. But she was really the one, working. She created a nonprofit that raised all the money to actually make the kits and design them and get them in hospitals. The trainings were really important because the hospital staff needed to be trained in forensics. But they also, now with this kit, they're going to go take the stand in trials and hold up this kit and explain everything they did to collect evidence. So the kit is also very important in trials at a time when survivors just aren't believed, to show, well, there's this person in a lab coat who did very careful analysis and found evidence. It was such a success in Chicago that other cities and towns got interested. And so she did the work of taking the idea sort of around to other cities and training people. So she was really spreading the idea of a national system.
I was fascinated to learn where Marty got some of her funding from. Could you speak about that?
Yeah, so she went to all the kind of regular funders at that time, but it was a time in which you just didn't say the word rape in polite company, and all the funders were male and also very kind of well-heeled. And so she couldn't get any money from them. And then she had this friend, she came to Marty and said, "Look, you can get money from the Playboy Foundation." It may sound weird, but the Playboy Foundation was really funding some of the most feminist organizations at that time. because they were very devoted toward sexual liberation and free speech. She did get the funding.
What surprises me about that, especially in the light of the information we have today, is Hugh Hefner and Playboy are they go hand in hand. But we know that there have been accusations of assault, of rape against Hefner. And so how does one reconcile the two?
Well, I don't think he was all that involved in the foundation. According to Margaret, he'd sort of show up once in a while with his cigar and his smoking jacket, but he wasn't there a lot. And so I think the people at the foundation had a lot of leeway, and they funded all kinds of things. They funded Bader Ginsburg's project at the ACLU, all kinds of very radical things that nobody else would fund.
You spoke a little bit about Marty receiving, getting pushback.
Well, I think the really interesting mystery at the heart of all of this is the fact that when you look at the trademark on this kit, they did trademark it in the late 1970s, and it's filed by Marty's nonprofit group. So clearly she was the one who did it, but this kit is filed under the name Vitullo, as the Vitullo kit. From what I'm told by people who were around then, this was just kind of what you had to do. They really needed buy-in from the police, obviously, because you're taking power away. If you're saying to them, you can't just prejudge the victims and you actually have to collect evidence, that's taking power out of the hands of the police officers, and they're obviously going to be very reluctant. And the Chicago Police Department then was quite corrupt. In fact, there was a secret police group called the Red Squad, and Marty Goddard believes that they were spying on her. They were spying on politicians and trying to blackmail people. That gives you a sense of what she was up against.
If I'm not wrong, you also came on this story looking into the backlog of rape kits in the Chicago Police Department, right?
Well, not just Chicago. When I started this in 2018, there was a huge scandal. There were almost 500,000 kits that had never been tested, and they were just sitting in police warehouses, or they'd even been thrown away. And so, this was heartbreaking for the victims who had gone through this really difficult process of filing their DNA. And I should say that when Marty Goddard was working, DNA identification hadn't been invented yet. It became a thing in America in the late 1980s. And then by the 1990s, police departments were supposed to be routinely checking the kits and testing the DNA, but they often weren't. And that's what made me curious about the kit in general and sort of sent me down looking for, how did it ever come to be? But the good news is, and I think unfortunately, this hasn't gotten out. People still think there's this huge backlog. It's gone down to about 50,000, which is a huge accomplishment. And that's all because of these amazing activists who've worked tirelessly to make that happen.
I'm curious if you could speak to what Marty would say or think about how far we've gotten in the way that we deal with and handle cases of sexual assault.
Well, in terms of the rape kit itself, I think one thing that's kind of shocking is it's still all on paper. It hasn't really changed. In fact, if anything, it's a lot harder to use because all these committees and crime labs have decided they want more and more stuff in it. And so it is packed with envelopes. It can ask for things that it shouldn't be asking for, like what medications the victim is on, including psych medications. So that's a real problem. There is an effort right now to standardize it because there's probably more than 1,000 different kits that are all slightly different across the country. So that's not helpful.
Pivoting for a bit, I'm curious, you mentioned a little bit about who Marty was right at the start, and I'm wondering how much we know about her personal life.
I know quite a bit, and I really tried to, my book is about searching for all that information because when I started this project, she had just disappeared. I was calling first of all, there's a lot of Martha Goddards in the world. I was calling them all, not finding anything, couldn't find her. Also couldn't find an obituary or anything to suggest that she was dead. So I had to assume she was still alive. So I spent, a lot of the book is about the months and months and months. I spent turning up a lot of information about who she was and how she worked, and including some amazing interviews with her from a long ago, but also tracking down people she worked with. And finally, as I began to know more and more and was able to connect more dots, I found her family members and learned just so much about her as a character, and a really interesting, quirky character. One friend described her as fucking relentless. She was she was a big mover and shaker in Chicago for a while. And then she really flamed out, unfortunately.
Right. I mean, it's hard work. I think anybody
Yeah.
would. I know you wrote about other inventors as part of your reporting in the past, and I'm curious whether you've seen this pattern emerge of people from marginalized communities, whether that's women, people with disabilities, people of color, having their inventions attributed to other people.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That definitely happens. I would say that what I'm more concerned about is that everything is designed from a point of view. And so Marty Goddard, really came from the point of view of the survivor. It matters whether a rape kit is designed from the point of view of what's good for the survivor or what's good for the police officer. It can be a very different kit. So absolutely, people at the front end of a problem who experience it firsthand, they are much better able often to come up with a new idea because they have skin in the game, they care.